Right, wonderful. So welcome, everybody. First order of business, have a roll call. Ms. Sharon?
Demita Beck-Taylor. Heidi Campbell.
Present.
Robert Deal.
Here.
Jennifer Hackett.
Here.
Jeff McCormick.
Here.
Vanessa Paz.
Here.
Beth Reardon.
Here.
Jason Repsher.
Here.
John Sherman.
Here.
Michael Sullivan. We have a quorum.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sharon. So I'd like to welcome everybody to the board meeting tonight, this afternoon. Thanks for showing up. Appreciate the public and our consultants showing up too. Thank you. Before we jump into the main order of business, we'll just make sure we approve the minutes and have a couple other business items to take care of. So in terms of the minutes from the last meeting, I'd entertain a motion.
So move.
So moved by Jeff, thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. Deal. All in order? All in favor? All opposed? Maybe you're opposed to my orderness, but be that as it may, the next thing is, unfortunately, our vice chair, Kenneth Michael, moved out of county, and so he is no longer capable of serving. And so we haven't, I don't know if there's been a nomination yet to replace him. Sharon,
We
or
need
what
somebody
that
to
process-
to nominate somebody.
Okay. All right, he is. We
Pardon
are.
me?
There's nominations in occurring somewhere. Not for his vice chairship, but for replacing him on the board.
Oh, for that. Yes, the mayor's office is looking to appoint somebody.
Okay, thank you. So meanwhile, we're looking to replace the vice chair, and I would suggest if anybody has a nomination to nominate one of you to be vice chair, I would invite that at this moment.
I would like to nominate Jennifer Hackett.
Well, there you go.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Heidi. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Are you opposed? I'm not opposed. Your votes should go for mine.
So as you can imagine, I had talked to Jennifer about this and asked if she was interested in serving in this role, and I really appreciate it. When the time comes, either you'll have an opportunity to run for election for chair.
Run from.
Use the crown.
Okay. So taking care of that business, the main reason we're here tonight is to actually hear a presentation from the consultants on the master plan going forward. And I just want to do a little setup for, I think all of us have been here, but just to make sure. We know that we went to the previous mayor, heck, it was when she was still mayor, so when the last 18 months or so, and asked for some money to do a plan. And why do we think we needed a plan? For all the reasons I think we all know. One is that we saw, not only were we unhappy with the lack of aggressive, of pretty much any recycling, both residential and commercial, but we also saw an opportunity that hadn't been there in the past to actually create an aggressive plan that could help us be ready for, kind of the lowest level thing is be ready to when the major recipient of our garbage, the landfill down in Murfreesboro, closes, which is 5 to 7 years. Chris, maybe it's a little bit longer than that. I'm not quite sure, but it's in that range. So there's just those kind of fun, kind of the pragmatic reasons for doing it. But I think the board, and certainly myself, we really wanted to have something that we could, at this time, give to the city council and to the leadership of the city to do something different. We hadn't been very effective in having that happen in the past. Then again, we didn't have a $500,000 plan to show to them and some really clear steps to get there. So I'm really pleased about all that, and I'm pleased with the way that we asked Public Works and asked the consultants to seek public input. We know we had this advisory committee, we had several meetings here. There was at least, there were 2 different surveys, one very kind of statistical, and the other one was just an open survey for anybody to respond. So I feel as if we have done our job to get good input from a lot of the public. We're going to ask for more tonight, and I feel like we're really in a good position to bring the mayor and the city council some really good options moving forward. So With that, I'm going to turn it over to our consultants. I don't know, Chris, are you doing the presentation tonight? And to lead us for, how long is the presentation?
About 30 minutes.
So we're going to have about a 30-minute. He's not going to walk page through the document, nor all the appendices. But as you might imagine, I met with Sharon and Chris and Zach, and Martin's not here, I guess. He's vacationing. But to actually think through tonight's presentation, but the request being that we would hear an overview tonight. The board will actually obviously have ability to ask questions, and then we'll open up to the floor and see how much the public wants to submit comments as well. So with that, Chris. Welcome to meet it.
All right, good afternoon. I'm Chris Gable with CDM Smith. I'm one of the authors of the Solid Waste Master Plan, and I'm here to present the draft plan that we have now available as of May. It'll be about a 30-minute overview, as we talked about, and then we can open it up to questions and comments as we go here. So, John kind of set the stage that we talked about, the state of solid waste management in Davidson County. I do have one slide dedicated to that. When you compare the rate of diversion that's happening right now in Davidson County, it's pretty low compared to national averages. Landfilling's more than the dominant form of solid waste management here at 82%. That's a very high number. The national average for recycling is around 26%. So you can see we're well below the national average. I did provide a couple of bar graphs as well that kind of give you a sense of over the decade how landfilling has really kind of dominated the scene. And all the blue you see in the bars is landfilling, green is recycling,
Hey,
and orange
Chris,
is
just one second.
composting.
Is there a summary of this also? Did we make handouts for folks as well? There's some additional
We
ones?
have copies of the draft.
Okay, so, all right, just so if
Okay.
anybody wants them. So
Yeah,
just
we do have those available up here. Sure. Okay. So, the picture is pretty clear that there is a heavy reliance on landfilling going on right now. Likewise, on the C&D side of it, C&D waste did have some recycling facilities that were here that were at a pretty prominent level for a while, but have largely diminished down to one or two. So it's pretty low in that regard, and at this point, pretty insignificant. It's almost all landfilling at that point. So the idea that we were looking forward and in this plan, when we set out to do it, was to set some goals that are to be obtained over a long period of time. This is a strategic plan getting us to a very high level of solid waste management. So we're looking at a zero waste philosophy is really what we're trying to adopt here. And the cornerstones of zero waste philosophy is minimizing your waste generation and maximizing landfill diversion. By the terminology of zero waste means maximizing your landfill diversion up to 90% or more. So, a program like the Food Saver Challenge that's been going on, conducted by the Nashville Food Waste Initiative, is a great example of adopting the zero food waste philosophy for waste reduction and diversion. These are the types of things that we want to see carried forward. So we set these three priorities for the plan in meeting these goals. We know we need to strengthen our public education and outreach. That's going to inspire the community to get involved. And we need to build a countywide program for recycling and waste reduction that can reach everybody. Right now, it's more of a piecemeal type program. And we want to revive the recovery programs that you have for C&D and bring back and exceed the levels of recycling that we've had in the past year and see that really blossom as well. So we set out to identify what we saw as the major challenges. What are the barriers to seeing diversion really reach a high level of zero waste levels? The first one that we identified out of the four challenges that we saw to be the most important is that currently Metro manages about 20% of the solid waste services. So the other 80% is all private type services right now that are essentially a black box as far as access to data and being able to really ascertain what types of advancements are being made. So with that limited knowledge, Metro is really not in a position right now to conduct a comprehensive plan. So that's the first challenge. That really is number one. The second is that insufficient funding is an issue for how you can conduct your education and compliance programs. I think that's evident somewhat in the fact that you already have some bans in place, but based on the studies that we did, particularly for doing the waste audit, it was evident that many of the materials that are currently banned from going to landfill are still going there in large quantities. So there's an issue there because it requires staff and it requires a larger program to conduct that kind of compliance. The third one is right now the recycling program is voluntary. So voluntary programs have been shown to have limited ability to really create diversion. I think it's probably a result of the perceived lack of commitment in the community. If it's a voluntary program, then it's kind of perceived, well, maybe it's not as important as it needs to be, and I may or may not do it. So it sends a different message. And then the last one is regarding the options that you have for alternatives to landfilling for food waste and C&D waste, because these are two very large components of your waste. The pie chart we're showing here illustrates organics as a component, 32% of the waste stream coming out of residential that's going to landfills right now. So that's certainly an area that we knew that we needed to target. So we do have a lot of different policies and programs in the plan that we talk about in great detail. I believe there's close to 40 of them. And today I'd like to just go over these 5 areas right here, because I think these are really what we consider to be the largest needle movers and the heart of the plan. So those 5 items are establishing the authority, which is more about what we were talking about, the 20% versus 80% as to services being provided. This is going to provide governance structure. So this is where you obtain your funding and the ability to implement the plan and to run new programs. Then we'll talk a little bit about mandatory recycling and food waste recovery as opposed to the voluntary programs. Save as you throw, which is a volume-based pricing system for how you can administer your collection services. On the C&D side, we wanted to look at deposit systems as a means of encouraging or really incentivizing builders to get into the game of recovery their C&D waste. And then the last component would be the franchise collection. This is going to allow countywide implementation of the plan, but it also does allow the current privatized collection to continue on.
I think that bar at the bottom is really important in the previous slide.
Yeah.
I don't know if everybody recognized it, but I think we all understand that there's a bunch of policy changes that need to happen.
What text may not have been a good choice.
Yeah, you're right. That one didn't show up as well, does it?
We'll have copies of this online and circulate.
So we're making the point. The recommendations are dependent on legislative support and program funding for the policies that we're looking at. So very critical aspect of it. So under the current delivery system, Metro provides services primarily to residential urban services district. The rest of it's provided by the private industry under direct subscription services. So they do virtually all of the commercial, and they do the general services district as well. So the lion's share of the delivery. So what we're recommending in the plan is that we look at bringing these all under one umbrella. So we're really looking at Metro overseeing delivery or privatized services for all the different aspects of solid waste management being provided to both residential and commercial, and then also unifying USD and GSD. And now we have an integrated approach which prompted the theme that we're having for the plan, which is one metro, one plan. Yes?
What does that mean for the private companies that currently operate? Does that mean that Metro will establish guidelines that they must then follow when they're in our area?
Yes, exactly. And that's going to be, I'll talk about that a little bit more regarding the franchise collection, because that's really the crux of that.
And well, how does that affect the satellite cities, which generally provide trash collection in their
Well, it would
municipalities?
be their decision if they want to participate or not. So at this point, we're flexible on participation of the cities. That hasn't been directly addressed with them, so. So moving from voluntary recycling to mandatory, we know has strong community support, because as John was mentioning, we release a number of surveys that we've got a lot of strong feedback from that says, yes, we really want to see more recycling and we want to see it happening in larger numbers. And the same goes for food waste, food scraps recovery. So we have that, and we know that mandatory policies are really essential to driving your numbers up above 40%. That's one of the clear benchmarks you see in data regarding cities that are going to higher diversion, is that they all have mandatory programs. And then you need to marry that with your education and compliance programs that we talked about under the priorities for the plan. Without those, you really can't enforce any of these types of mandates. So the collection system that we're proposing is called Save As You Throw, and it's a volume-based system. It's a 3-bin system where you have one bin dedicated to recyclables, dry recyclables that is. Then there is a green bin for your organics, and then one for your trash. So the costs of the recycling and the organics are built into the cost that you pay for your trash can. And your trash can is volume-based. So if you elected to have a 96-gallon can, you would pay the most. There would be a 64-gallon can or somewhere around that size, you would pay a little less. And if you wanted the smallest one, you would pay the least. So it provides you a means of incentivizing recycling and composting, and it also provides equitable pricing. So if you're a household that doesn't generate a lot of waste, then you're not paying as much. So there is that aspect of it is generally well received. I would say that this program is really, from the functionality of a diversion program, this is kind of the heart of the system here. This is where most of your diversion is generated, because you've now essentially are able to separate all of the components that you want to divert at the household or at the business. So the deposit program I talked about.
So Chris, just real
Yeah.
quick question on that, and I know it's in the plan too, but to be clear, we're talking about it both residential and commercial, and I'm assuming, obviously, the commercial, it'd be a different kind of container and all that, and size of business and
Exactly.
Right, okay.
Right, yeah, it wouldn't be the residential cart system. That's a good point. From the standpoint of commercial, they would be sized differently, and they would have a little bit of variation to how you do the residential. But they would be held to the same standard and have a similar type of volume-based payment system. The deposit program that we're referring to is a program that's pretty popular on the West Coast. There are other large cities in the U.S. that have it. I know there's a number of them in Texas as well. But it's proven to be very effective for recovering C&D. And this one is pretty straightforward in its incentive. It's economic. The idea is that a builder that comes in for a construction permit is required to leave a deposit, and it's based on the size of the project and the nature of the project. And then once they meet the thresholds that you've established for your mandates for C&D waste, they bring back and provide documentation that would come from a certified recovery facility. And once that's been proven, they get their deposit back and they go on with their construction. So it is an alternative to fining for infractions, and That's a particular issue here because your maximum fine limit is $50, which really doesn't provide any economic incentive for a builder at this point. So as everybody knows, there's a lot of construction going on in Nashville, and who knows when that will ever slow down. But last year, there was 9,000 construction permits. So we won't be just rolling out a deposit program full-blown next year. This is a type of program that needs to occur in phases, and typically you would start with some larger projects. One suggestion would be maybe projects larger than 20,000 square feet. And you would need to hire at least 2 new staff into the program to really even launch a deposit program to start with.
Can you explain how that would work? Can you give me an example, like developer X puts in how much money for a project that's X big, and when does she get it back?
Right. It can be percentage based on the value of the job. It can be also based on the dimensions and the amount of materials that are going to go into the job. So it has to do, there's a equation of the deposit relating to the magnitude of the project. And from there, there'll be recovery requirements. And the builder goes over the requirements and puts together their recovery plan or construction waste management plan. They submit the plan with the permit, and it gets reviewed at that time. And once you see that their plan makes sense and it appears feasible, then they submit their deposit and they get to go do the work. So when they come back with their documentation, these are from facilities that have already been certified to be part of the program and understand the deposit requirements. They issue documents to the builder. The builder brings them in, says, here they are. I recycled this much concrete, this much metal, this much steel, that type of thing. And once he's met those requirements, then his deposit is returned to him at that time.
And will you be setting the percentages, or will that be legislative? Will city council do it? How will that get established?
Yeah, we're still a long ways from actually setting the actual values of that, and that would be a collaborative process for sure. I mean, we would certainly play a role in making some recommendations, and we can look at how other cities are doing it, other counties are doing it as well. But certainly, we would have input from everybody you named there.
And it would need to be legislation. Metro would have to pass an ordinance requiring it. So I think that this is one of those areas, just like Chris said, that needs some ramping up. We've already had some very preliminary conversations with some members of council and one very large developer, just talking to them about, does this frighten you? And the interesting thing is a lot of the very large developers are already doing lead projects or doing a fair amount of recycling just because they're huge, they've got corporate policies. So I think the concept of starting with some people that have already sort of bought in will make it easier, and then phasing in projects over time so that people start to see it's possible. We've even thought about possibly starting out with a requirement of just separate containers. So have a container, a roll-off on site for scrap metal, have an open top on site for unpainted, untreated wood or whatever, and as part of a ramping up so that people start to see it's really not that hard. You have to have a little bit more planning on the front end, but it's doable. It's something I can do.
Jennifer, I would add, it's much like the other programs we're talking about. You're always going to have companies out there that just aren't going to do it. They're going to still pay the deposit up front, and they're not going to participate, or they're not going to come back and get that deposit. In much the same way, by putting a funding source associated with that program now, for the ones who don't do it, you now have an ability to take that cost and help run the program that is being participated in by the ones who do use it to help drive that diversion. I mean, just like in the same way with the Save As You Throw program, we know there's going to be people, even though you have 3 bins, they're going to get the largest bin, they're never going to stick anything in the other 2 containers. And over time, we hope the education process, addresses a lot of that, but there's still always going to be people, no matter what you do, they're going to do that. But by the way the pricing structure is set, that then in turn helps fund and pay for the other programs that are helping divert a lot of that waste stream.
Going back to the save as you throw thing with the bins, will there be a requirement that people have all 3 bins?
I
You
mean,
can't just get the garbage bin, you have to get a composting and recycling bin, right?
That's right.
now, we can't force people to use, I mean,
No, but I'm just saying, obviously, the incentivization doesn't work if you don't do that.
and all these, I mean, you know, we were trying to keep this presentation, obviously, to a short time period to let y'all focus on questions, specific questions you may have. When you really get into the timetable that Chris will touch on later, you know, we're talking about these like they're a holistic program, which they are, but they will be phased in pieces, obviously, and we'll talk a little bit about that tonight, but certainly would be interesting feedback from the group in regards to how you would see that bill. I mean, we wouldn't start out with a citywide, I mean, we don't have the facilities in place to say tomorrow you've got to use this system and everyone has 3 bins. If we had the bin setting in Nashville somewhere and everyone got one tomorrow, the facilities are not in place in Nashville to process that level of material. So it is a staged rollout. And some of those, you know, that level of detail, sort of getting back to Jennifer's question in regards to C&D, you know, a lot of these are the ideas of how this process works, but getting down to the detail level, how that be rolled out for a lot about what John touched on earlier. It's a lot about how the policy is developed at a council level and how the funding and funds coming into the program are sort of allocated from a council level.
Yeah, that was what I was wondering about the infrastructure. We don't have infrastructure to do any of this yet. And
Right.
how are we going to promote it or initiate it?
Right. I will touch on facilities.
Okay.
There are some slides dedicated to that as well. And you're all asking great questions because they all have to do with how you fit these pieces together. There are quite a few different ways you can do it, but one thing you wouldn't want to do is have all this material collected and know where to take it. So
Yeah.
we know we're not going to do it that way.
We do have 2 C&D recycling facilities in Davidson County right now, but I don't think that they would have enough capacity necessarily to handle this. So you're looking at, you know, you have some limited capacity right now, but we would certainly have to build up future capacity.
And I mean, I think the way I always think of it is like, we have to be able to send market signals out to anybody who might want to use this as a resource. And if there's not the resource available, then they're not going to come, right? So we have to start sending the right signals, and that they have to know that it's sustained and it's going to be there, not just in 2 years, but in 5 years and 10 years. So I can imagine that we may not have all the, we may be putting stuff in the landfill to begin with that we won't have to over the long run because the market hasn't responded yet. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I can just pragmatically, it seems to make sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's probably that way. And to answer your question, Vanessa, I think you need to have the policies in place. You need to have the firm framework that we're talking about so that investors know that their investments are going to be secure, that they have a means for ensuring that there is a demand for what their services are. So once those are in place, it's generally the case that it doesn't take that long for these facilities to then follow that. And that's really kind of the steps generally that you have to take. So you do that kind of incrementally. So rather than launching it all at one time and then waiting for 10 facilities to pop up. You would start with a smaller amount and work your way up from there. So the last strategy I guess I wanted to talk about is franchise collections. The concept, I'm sure most people are somewhat familiar with. It's just the idea of, instead of direct subscription to the customers, it's now contracted through the public agency, in this case, Metro. The private haulers would bid on exclusive zones. They don't always have to be that way, but right now we're looking at more the case of exclusive zones where the hauler that wins the bid for a zone would be the only hauler operating in that zone. The advantage and the reason that we feel strongly about having it in the plan is that it now aligns your collection services, the save as you throw or any other type of collection you're doing, with the plan strategies, because the plan strategies can now be folded in to the franchise contracts. And the haulers that are providing these services under the franchise contract are required to follow all those requirements. So if we tell them you'll be collecting recyclables, yard waste, food waste this way, these are the carts we're using, this is the system we have, they're required to follow that system. Obviously, that's absent right now, and there's really just kind of left up to voluntary participation. So the idea would be to do that in the commercial sector and the residential sector. They're typically done separately, and you'd have different haulers responding to different RFPs for bids on zones. In an area like this where you have a wide diversity of haulers, and there's an interest in maintaining that, some of the local companies, you would set aside carve-outs, essentially is what they are, zones that only small haulers would bid on. So they have the capacity to continue on in the area and not just get outbid by a large national company.
And Chris, has there been any studies on if that actually reduces kind of the overall number of miles traveled? I'm thinking about carbon footprint, and I'm thinking about traffic. Is there?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it is inherently more efficient to have one hauler picking up from every home or business within an area as opposed to multiple trucks coming in. I think that's, you can envision it, or if you've experienced it yourself, seeing multiple trucks running up and down the streets. The road wear, the vehicle emissions, noise, and safety are all issues that improve with franchise collections and having exclusive zones. Those are often reasons that franchises are even looked into, is to really identify those benefits as well as what they have set aside for their plans. So, slide here just gives you an idea. We talked about these being kind of the needle movers, the heavy hitters. These 5 strategies, based on the waste modeling that we've done, which is data from case studies of cities throughout the U.S. The Save As You Throw is, like I said, really providing the biggest impact, but collectively these 5 are providing enough diversion that you could get up to, we estimate about 65% high diversion rate just with these, getting you up from your 18, so you're well on your way to getting to 90%. We also touched on this issue that the landfilling scenario that you have now, I guess it would be the age of cheap and convenient disposal, is going to be ending, within this decade, the next 10 years for sure. Longer hauls and less competition are going to drive prices up. It's expected that landfilling will become more expensive. So the timing for implementing this plan is very it's very ideal given the situation that you're in. That now is the time when you would want to divert as well, because the disposal option is really not going to be as desirable in the future. So we talked about the need for infrastructure, and it certainly will be as you're moving away from disposal and you're now looking at waste as a form of resource management. The landfills are going to be replaced by other forms of materials management, facilities such as composting, material recovery facilities, enhancements of the ones you have or expansions of the ones you have now, possibly even a new one, anaerobic digestion, and a myriad of other technologies really are out there that I wanted to touch on too, briefly here before I sum it up. This slide is really, just wanted to make you aware of the fact that there are a lot of new technologies out there, and this really seems to be the age where waste as a resource is really becoming more of a reality. And we're finding new ways to tackle the problems we have with the limited tools we have. When you look at traditional recycling and composting, there's not that much else out there that's really being used. So we want to present an inviting atmosphere within Nashville to bring in and really encourage, innovative technologies to come into the area, create new jobs, but also address the problems that you have with many of the elements of the waste stream. Eastman Chemical Company is in Kingsport, Tennessee. They have 2 patented technologies, what they call carbon renewal technologies, that are a form of plastic recycling that's known as chemical recycling. So it's really the advent of now figuring out what to do with all this mixed plastic that was going to China previously and right now doesn't have a place to go. We're finding that there are actually new ways to deal with this material, break it down to polymer levels, and then reuse it. Enerchem is arguably the first company in North America to make cellulosic fuels, and they have a number of facilities that are in operation, and they're moving into the U.S. They're in Ontario, they're also in Edmonton, and we're making high-octane biofuels from waste. Fiberite is a company that we've been following for quite some time, has an operating facility now in Maine that handles 50 different little municipalities and are making a variety of biofuels and industrial sugars out of mixed waste. So I think it's really an exciting time for what's happening in the industry, and I think if we set the table for inviting them and making our plan attractive to innovators, we'll see them wanting to come to Nashville.
I think the key when you start talking about facilities, it is a mix of both private and public facilities. Certainly there will be investments, and there's already discussions and pieces that are, the wheels already turning on some public facility ideas, particularly with anaerobic digestion in combination with Metro Water Services, which I think Chris will touch on in a second, and some others that would be Metro-owned facilities. But at the same time, there's also a lot of the pieces of the plan is some of the economic development piece of exactly like this to hopefully then also drive some private investment. You already have people in this public here that have privately invested dollars into pieces that are all part of the plan. So I don't see, this plan is a multitude of facilities that are a multitude of ownerships and a multitude of different types of product they're taking that ultimately get us to the diversion that we're looking for.
So one of the aspects of the plan was also to assess its value. That did not project well at all, did it? So I'll just tell you what's on the slide. I'll let you know. We performed a triple bottom line analysis, which looks obviously at the cost of the system that you're at monetarily, but also monetizes the value of the environmental benefits and the social benefits. And in the case of this study, the 2 primary benefits we looked at were avoided carbon emissions and economic activity and new jobs. So when you look at the evaluation of the various portfolios we put together, the most aggressive one was getting you to 90%. And that portfolio fared the best regarding a triple bottom line analysis. The cost per ton was the lowest of the 3, and the value that you got from it and the benefits of carbon emissions and economic activity and new jobs were the highest. It's about a little more than a 4-fold difference in the cost versus the benefits value. So on the slide, the bar chart you see over here on the right side, the green is the cost per ton, and the blue is the avoided emissions and job impacts valuation.
And do you have that same chart, Chris, for the conservative and the moderate portfolio as well?
We have the values. I don't know if we have a chart, but we can certainly add it.
I'm just wondering if
Yeah.
if we're looking at it.
Yeah, I do not have that chart here, though. So as Zach was mentioning, we're looking at rolling things out in phases. And the idea is there are many other factors and pieces that have to fit together to make a plan like this work. And it is a long haul. I mean, we're talking about a period of time to get all the programs in together that could take north of 15 years to really get things going. So an aggressive plan, such as the red line you're looking at, you could reach high diversion rates in probably a 10-year time frame. But what's more typical is a plan that launches programs of this size of magnitude anyway. They require a little bit more time to build momentum up front. And that upfront part is really about early phase items such as gaining the authority, establishing the policies, running pilot programs, building up your education and compliance programs. All these types of things take some time to get in place, and then you can start rolling out some of your high diversion strategies that we talked about.
And kind of the concern of when you had the two charges, I'm assuming that the more aggressive of the two, you run a higher risk of either public disillusionment or just lack of market, or for whatever reason, the signals in the education aren't aligned. Is that why you have put it this way?
Yes, I mean, well, for one, it's just often very difficult in reality. You may want to set an aggressive schedule, and you find that you're unable to do it, is really one aspect. I think it's more realistic that the green line is the way to go. I think it also just makes more sense because there is higher risk involved with trying to be too aggressive. And for a number of the reasons that you stated, that you certainly, if you're rolling out too much too quickly, you have less ability to get a wrap around it as well and really run the programs well. So some of these things do require some patience, I think, is really the way we're looking at it. But we have to know that we're making progress. It's not about saying, well, don't worry, these things will happen 30 years from now. You're setting goals in short little time frames, 3-year time frames, 2-year time frames, 4-year time frames. That's about max. And that's how you make your progress. So, as far as things that we could do right off the bat, there's some recommendations that we'd like to make for getting started. A couple of these are about, Metro leading by example, I guess you could say. When it comes to adopting the zero waste philosophy, issuing an executive order on waste reduction within Metro would be a great signal to the community. Establishing an environmentally preferable purchasing program would be another great signal of waste reduction. And assessing your resources, your products, and your services from an environmental impact standpoint. We could look at launching a food waste pilot program. It doesn't have to be a huge program, but we can start doing it, start gaining some interest, and start working on how that program would function. We certainly need to look at how we're going to execute these strategies under the Metro Charter. And we can also look right now at starting to draft the mandates for C&D waste and for food waste. We could start with larger generators on the food waste side as well, and that way pare it down even more. And the last slide I have is just to say there are some things that are already in progress, and one of the things I'm pretty excited about is that already there is commitment to going to every other week recycling, and that program is going to start in February 2020. So we're already increasing the recycling collection, which is going to help tremendously. On the food waste management side, there is already the option now for food waste to be dropped off at 4 convenience centers. There's an ongoing study that we're working on right now in conjunction with Metro Water to look at digestion of food waste, co-digested with biosolids, and looking at the prospects of making compost out of that material. So now we're creating a win-win situation where biosolids that are currently going to the Middle Point landfill, as well as food scraps from the community, could then be made into a usable product. We're also looking at ways to...
Hang on, just hold on to that for a second.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I mean, Chris, that seems like a big deal. Is this like a big deal? Like this means this can, what do we have? 30% residential food waste organics?
Yeah.
I mean, are we saying that there's a potential that public works, the water works, the waste treatment plants can take this material and mix it in so we have high, like what is A level, whatever, high quality compost, Class A compost?
Yep. That is what we're looking at right now. We're more or less testing out scenarios, looking at case studies. We've had some help from the compost company on that side, looking at the prospects of how would it impact their operation if they were to mix biosolids in with food waste, and how would they might approach that. It's going to help us generate some realistic scenarios and realistic costs. I don't think it answers the challenge, I guess, of recovering all food scraps, but it certainly could take a sizable amount. And it's really addressing using the infrastructure of the wastewater plant. They have a lot of excess capacity naturally built into their designs. So you're really taking advantage of that, and there's sizable cost savings taking that approach. So when you create a scenario where they willingly want to take materials because they're benefiting from the management of their biosolids, then you've created a great scenario. And I would say, yeah, that's a big deal. That's something to get excited about.
It also gives us the ability to look at a facility that already exists, and it ties back into what Sharon and we've been talking about with the potential piling some food waste recovery and diversion programs in certain small areas. Now we have a system that potentially is already in place where this is not something that's a 5-year out or 10-year out window. It's something that we can look at on a smaller scale, in the near term future of really starting to look at that, then be able to test out what kind of issues may exist, how we can better operate the program on a more larger scale, et cetera, and then be able to roll that out, assuming it goes well. The benefit too, we're also reducing not only landfilling the food waste from Metro solid waste public works standpoint, but right now, I don't remember the number, Chris, but Metro Water Services disposes about 300,000.
Tons a year? Yeah, that's what.
They dispose 300,000 pounds a year themselves of non-Class A biosolids that go to the landfill directly. So this could be a win-win for them, not to mention also allow us to produce electricity on site that can be used there at the facility. So that's a lot of the reason they're sort of interested in sitting around the table, because there is some benefits operationally from their standpoint as well.
And I just want to check in on your lingo. Biosolid means poop, yeah?
It means digested and treated, yes. Digested and treated solids that are left over from the wastewater process.
And what do you hope to do with it? Did you say you wanted to make it fuel?
I don't know if you're looking at fuel, but when the gas that's produced off the digesters that we would utilize, there's 2 existing digesters at the facility now. The layout for long term that we're actually discussing with Metro Water would look at 4 at some point, the growth up to 4 digesters at their facility. They would burn that gas to create heat and electricity, which they can readily use in their process. So as opposed to having to work with NES or TVA to try to sell that power back to the grid, they can use it on site. So they directly can heat shade on site, which is a huge savings for them. The process then that would be used will allow us to produce a Class A, which Class A biosolids can be utilized for fertilizer. So it's very similar to what a compost material or a soil amendment material can be used for. There are wastewater facilities across the United States that actually market and sell their Class A biosolids as a fertilizer. I know Milwaukee comes to mind right off the top.
And Nashville's too.
That's true.
They're just
yeah.
starting.
So it's central. That is correct. So it's not unprecedented for Metro Water already. Central wastewater plant already produces a Class A dry material that a company called Manco out of Arkansas takes and then uses as a soil amendment at farms throughout the Midwest.
Any idea what percentage of the biosolids created are Class A as opposed to other classes?
No.
Just locally.
Locally, because Central is the largest facility that Metro Water operates, a large percentage of the solids they produce now are Class A. But Dry Creek, which is where, for y'all that aren't familiar, Dry Creek is in the Rivergate Mall area, sort of goes full northeast Nashville corridor, Madison. That facility is the one that has this potential capacity at this point that does not produce a Class A solids. The other facility, Whites Creek, which is over in West Nashville does not currently treat their own biosolids. It all goes to a central facility. There's probably a lot more about wastewater than I want to know.
I have a question about monetizing the waste stream. So when you're monetizing your waste stream, are you, and you're thinking about the technologies of the companies that you were mentioning?
Yes.
Is it always net negative? I mean, is it always, are we just looking for ways to offset by getting private involvement, the cost of, it's never a point where that waste stream is actually valuable, right? I mean, net, right?
Possibly. I guess I can't say that, I mean, for all technologies or what's out there, but depending on the value of their end product, it's not inconceivable that they would be willing to pay for the feedstock.
Yeah, but I'm
Take it away.
talking about when you're looking at the overall waste stream, I'm assuming it's probably not. And I asked that question because when I look at your time projection and your model, I'm just wondering if your assumptions were that things were static. Or do you have levers in your model that actually say, hey, what if we have a very positive improvement in this technological sector? Then
Certainly things could go faster. I think one of the reasons that after we sort of drafted the original report and we sat down with Sharon and John and talked through a lot of things, we flattened that out a little bit. It's because the more you try to push it forward, the more definitive the upfront capital cost, there's no doubt would be. Because
Right.
you would have to, there'd be a lot more public monies that would have to go towards facilities if you try to push some of those programs earlier. I think our hope is that, number one, you drive education and greater participation in that first time period as you slowly ramp these up. At the same time, you hopefully then drive more private investment, which does help with the net negative and maybe even net positive of the program. It really comes down to the political cost and will to drive some of the program and the public's, how that authority that we talked about earlier, how that takes effect in regards to how the funding comes into the program.
yeah, and so that would be another one of my questions. When you looked at this environment, did you weight heavily what you perceived as the political environment, the appetite for funding? I mean, right? You must have weighed that in. Like, if we were in San Francisco, maybe it would have been much more.
And that was a lot of the reason for a lot
More
of
like the
public
red curve.
outreach comments. I mean, we don't have all there's a whole appendix on, the survey and the general response in regards to, there was a lot of questions about cost.
Right.
As y'all are all aware, the way the structure is now, it's totally off the general fund tax basis. So to a lot of, I'm sure if you ask the general citizen in the city of Nashville and Davidson County, most of them would say solid waste. If they live, okay, I'll take that back. If they live in the USD, they would say my trash service is free. Or most of them probably don't know how it's funded, besides the fact they don't cut it. They don't get a bill in the mail from Sharon saying we're collecting your solid waste stream. So that is definitely a hurdle, and that's where the authority piece comes in. I think our recommendation in a perfect world where you didn't have the charters set up in the way it is here with the GSD, USD would be to go to a total enterprise-based system. And that's what a lot of cities do, where it is ran much like the water system or the wastewater system, or in the case of Metro, the stormwater utility, which is becoming very popular across the nation, the stormwater system, or your electric bill or your gas bill. It's a service like any of the other services you have. Unfortunately, that is a hurdle in the case of how the charter is set up. And so when we talk about authority, that's really a lot of, and I think that is definitely another reason that first part, I think, will end up being stretched a little bit more than that aggressive approach, just strictly from the standpoint of getting the policies and governmental structure in place to be able to truly recoup the cost to do the programs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and as the mayor of a satellite city, I would say that the best way to do that with the satellite cities would be to incentivize them on the back end by putting carrots and sticks in the final collection phase, Probably sticks.
Sticks, huh? Okay.
They seem to work well. for cities. Here it's for, good for companies, but anyway.
So I know, Chris, you're continuing to go through this, just real
Yeah,
quickly.
yeah.
A time check, we're almost at 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and that's 6. And I just want to see how much longer you have, and I like the fact that we ask questions now, so it's great, so it's fresh. So we may be going longer through your presentation, but we're asking questions, and I assume that everybody will have more questions later, but continue.
This is my last slide.
Cool.
So yeah, I think this is great. I mean, there's no problem doing it this way, and I think we have tackled a lot of the issues as we were discussing them, so I think it's
I will
fine.
interrupt you one more time, though, Chris, sorry.
Yeah, please.
This issue, though, Heidi, about... Heidi, the issue we were talking about is like the time frame. I don't know what the answer to that is, other than I think we have to have everything in our pocket. And when the opportunity comes, if we can move something quicker, we move it, and if it has to slow down, so we slow down. I mean, you know probably better than any of us about the politics of moving anything. And, you know, windows open, windows close, things happen. And so I just think that we have to be ready and have everything ready, whatever that's going to be. And I mean, for example, this whole anaerobic digestion of food scraps, and we're going to talk about the Nashville Food Waste Initiative. I mean, we weren't anticipating the Food Waste Initiative 2 years ago, and, you know, Linda Bregan and her shop, NRDC, have done a great job of doing something that nobody's been able to do in this community. And we did, you know, that was just a really important thing that we didn't anticipate. So there's other things too, but we have in our back pocket or front pocket. Okay.
And I think, you know, like Chris mentioned earlier, though we're highlighting 5 or 6 of the big needle movers, as he mentioned earlier, I think there's a total of 50 to 60 total policies. It's not to say that one of those policies we show is number 60 in our plan, like John mentioned. There could be something that happens that makes that an easy do right now. There's also things that make things a hard do right now, just like the state legislature passing the ban on the ban of plastic bags and styrofoam containers. If you read our document, that's a line. I know it's a small needle mover, but it is a policy at some point that would. So there's going to be things like that that are going to occur. I think that's probably the one other big piece that, getting back to your timeline question, Heidi, is we don't want to be as aggressive to the point where we cause a stir. It's one thing to talk about local politics from a funding standpoint at your city or metro council level. We don't want to stir the pot to the point where the state all of a sudden starts getting real interested in what the city of Nashville or Memphis or others are doing, to the point where they feel the need to stick policy pieces in there that put up roadblocks potentially to some of the things that
You want to very quietly do good things?
Unfortunately, that's how it takes sometimes.
Yeah.
It's the best scenario.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so we got downtown collection. What we got here, Chris?
Yes, okay. We have another study going on right now to look at ways to improve the collection scenario in the downtown area, which has been a problem that for quite some time. And a lot of it just relates to the fact that the funding allocated for it doesn't really match up with the massive amounts of waste collection that's required downtown. So that's ongoing right now. We've talked about the
tax on pedal beer wagon. I think that's.
Is that the way to do it?
And scooters.
And scooters. Okay, yeah. I was just going to mention, the relaunch right now of the Food Saver Challenge is another great aspect of education and outreach that's happening. In a larger view, looking at the Greater Nashville Regional Council, the formation of a solid waste plan, including 13 counties in the area, is a bonus for us at moving forward right now, because really, I mean, looking at getting to 90% and looking at ways to implement things sooner rather than later, regional collaboration may play a big role in that. So I think it's terrific that both of these things are happening at the same time. There's some great synergies we can get out of what's happening right there. And likewise, the mayor's Nashville Made initiative plays into these facilities that we were talking about. They're tailor-made for that type of initiative to really encourage them to come in here and make this their home and set up shop.
And that's part of the Economic and Community Development Office. The National Made is sort of looking to bring more manufacturing and opportunities, job force opportunities from that perspective, and playing in on some of the potential for markets or manufacturing that could use some of these end products is an incentive that a program like this would hopefully help drive.
So we are now open for questions if we'd like. That's the end of my presentation.
Well, one thing I'd just like to hear you or Chris or Sharon, somebody talk about is this greater Nashville regional piece. And what is that, you know, is that moving faster? Is it moving differently? What's the plug in there? How do we leverage what we're doing against that? I mean, what do we know about that you can help all of us understand?
Yeah, so this is actually, and Heidi Campbell is actually on the regional mayor's portion of this, and I'm participating in the regional solid waste director. But the money that TDEC gave GNRC to do this has allowed them to, historically, GNRC has done assessments, but they've never done a regional plan. So they are working on a regional plan, and part of the reason this started was that the
regional solid waste plan.
Yeah, a regional solid waste plan. And part of the reason this started is the regional mayors, when they got together to talk about transit, also brought up the issue of trash and how, and what I think, you know, individually, we all sort of think in our silos, this is a Davidson County problem, or this is a Rutherford County problem. It's a regional problem, and it's something that we all share facilities. You know, most of the recycling in the region comes into Davidson County. All the landfill goes to, you know, to other counties. And so they are, and I believe, Heidi, they gave a presentation to.
I'll tell you, it kicked off with us going to the Tri-County Waste Facility.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, my God. It was really eye-opening for all of us. And I think that was important because even if you intellectualize all of this, I think I think everybody should have to do that. I really do. I know most people here probably have, but I mean, boy, it really, really drives home the fact that mountains and mountains of trash. I mean, average family in the U.S. is generating 11 pounds of trash a day. It's just piles of trash, and so it's a lot of it is awareness, and then there's a real differential in terms of how different mayors want to deal with. I think that some of the more conservative mayors don't necessarily want to have as progressive a recycling program. They don't think that their community will have the appetite for it. So you have an imbalance there. So somehow it's going to have to involve finding some kind of an integrated approach that works for everybody, because there are mutual efficiencies, which is kind of the whole point of the GNRC in general, is to find those mutual opportunities so that we're not being cannibalizing or duplicative when we're trying to get stuff done.
Yeah, and so they are going to put out their solid waste regional plan in the next few months. But at the same time, they are looking at, because there's a fair amount of interest on the group meetings that I go to on the solid waste folk side of a regional authority, and that's something that there's been a lot of interest in. Was that presented to the mayors at the last meeting?
Yeah. Well, we talked about
Present
it.
to the executive committee.
Or was it just to the executive committee? Yeah.
Right.
So there's a huge possibility for the first time to actually have all of these counties in Middle Tennessee trying to work together to find solutions for everybody, instead of each of us trying to, you know, sort of do our own thing, build our own facilities. It's such common sense, but sometimes it doesn't always end up happening. But this has just been with the Middle Point landfill closing and everything that just kind of coming up at the same time. It was perfect timing, and I believe they're going to continue to get. Was there anybody? Oh no, I think she left. I think that TDEC is going to continue to give them funding to continue some of this work. I'm not 100% sure how all that is going, but it's going to be a very valuable report.
And the idea of having a regional waste authority, would that supplant a Davidson County authority?
No, there would have to be some kind of an arrangement where certain parts of that were left to Davidson,
Yeah, because the regional authority wouldn't get into how we individually pick up. The regional authority would probably focus more on facilities, cooperative purchasing,
Got it.
you know, contracts that benefit the whole region, sort of that
Limit
bigger,
traffic.
yeah.
So the Public Works Authority that was mentioned in the draft, that's a Davidson County initiative.
Yeah.
Okay.
That, if we can sell the concept. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a way of taking waste as it's currently managed and treating it like a utility. That you're literally looking at waste, like water services, looking at how much water you use and how much wastewater you send back, NES with electricity, and all of your decisions are based upon what it costs, and that cost is potentially with Metro's charter. Some of it would be borne by USD taxes, and some of it would be potentially borne by the resident. It's similar to, right now, we are charging people that have 3 or more trash carts. The third and fourth cart, believe it or not, there are people out there. There's about 600 of them. It's not a lot. But there are more people that have 2 carts, and that would be the next step, is starting to charge people that have 2 trash carts for that second cart, and trying to educate them and push them towards recycling instead of just, throwing it in the big brown bin.
Great, so open up to the board. Other questions, other comments?
Yeah, I'm curious, like, council members, have they heard this presentation, how it was, are they responding to this? Is there any interest, or is there, like, what's the climate?
So the Public Works Committee, from last year, so it's not, although there's some current members on the Public Works Committee that were on the Public Works Committee last year, they were interviewed, and so these concepts have been floated by them. We're hoping to do kind of a deeper dive into it with them at some point in the future. There is a lot of interest in waste diversion from our current council. Now, we are getting ready to have a big turnover. I think there are 10 or 12 council seats that either the current person is not running or they're term limited. So we're going to have a shift.
So this will be a great opportunity for the public input, like, for all your council members.
Yes.
Let them know that this is important. I mean, this is the way, this is the power of people. Like, create a little bit of noise and have our elected officials know that we are interested in this, or we want change. So this is where you guys have the power. I mean, we have the power, and I will hope that this place was full, and that's where the power lies, I think, of making changes. Like, how can that happen? Like, I don't know. Sitting on
Make
these,
everybody go to the
yeah.
Okay, make sure you turn your microphone on, because we are recording this so that we can post it online. Thank you.
So if we're turning the waste collection into a facility similar to NES and the water bills, how are we going to, if you don't pay your water bill, you don't have water. If you don't pay this trash bill, you may not get trash collection. But if that's not of a concern for a particular citizen, or in high renter areas or high areas that have turnover, how are we going to manage that or enforce them to keep that service up to ensure that they're having trash collected properly?
So, did you want to answer that? I was going to say the entire implementation plan and how you roll that out is something that will have to be developed, but this is not a lot of other cities are doing this, so I think we're going to have a lot of good examples to look at and figure out what works best for Nashville, given, our climate. Certainly things like multifamily complexes are one of the last you work with, because it's some of the hardest people. They're not property owners. They're not, sort of in control or feel connected necessarily like a property owner does about, I'm paying taxes and I'm, getting this service, or I'm paying for this. So I think as we get closer to how that would look, if we can create an authority and move some of these things along, we're going to take a really deep look into successful implementation, because it does work very well in a lot of cities.
Just like a stormwater utility would, and I'm sure these conversations were heavily undertaken by Metro Water with that. In most places, anytime you put in a service, like you mentioned, that's not tied to a direct type of service that an individual would be concerned about losing, in most cases, there's a huge cost with starting a new billing enterprise. So for the most part, you're going to tie any new, if you created a new billing system or a new authority and went to some level of enterprise-based solid waste system where you would pay if you had a larger card, it would more than likely be tied, and like Sharon said, that's a way down the road implementation type decision, but more than likely be tied to some system that already bills the general public for a service in the city. That's typically how it's done. If you went to, and I'll use Memphis because I've worked with their billing system directly. In the case of Memphis, MLG&W bills for electric, gas, water, wastewater, stormwater, solid waste, fire protection, mosquito and rodent fee. Some people who live in the county have like 10 or 12 line items on their MLG&W bill. Now, there's negative sides on the biller in that case because they get all the calls, and that there's always things to work out in that regard. But I wouldn't foresee a situation where you would probably enact an authority and they would send a direct solid waste or recycling or whatever that would be called, bill, because you're exactly right. Then what is your ramification if you don't pay? Then you get into health issues and health department issues, et cetera, for not, and rodent control if you don't pick up the waste. So I would see it more than likely tied to a system that generally, because most of those situations like that, there is no partial bill payment. You either pay your bill and you pay for everything, or you don't pay your bill and you don't pay for, that's how I've seen it work in most cities where I've done billing type enterprise rollouts.
Another question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about, I read over the public comments that we have so far and over the draft. And in the public comments, there's quite a few questions and concerns about glass recycling. And in the draft, if I read it correctly, it seems as though you've said you believe that glass is phasing out. And so it's not really addressed as something to look at moving forward. But I'm worried about what if it's not, especially if we're only at 12% recycling with the national average at 26, and if 5.4% of our recycling is glass, that's half of our current recycling, if I'm reading this correctly, plus the significant concerns from the population. And if we're looking for them to get buy-in and to speak to their public officials saying, we want this, I'm wondering if we should look at glass.
Right. I think, there's a long-term view towards glass as well, because the short-term view is it's being phased out like you're talking about, and I believe we do mention it in that manner. It's primarily related to the current state of the markets. So when you're looking at tremendous costs to deal with glass and there's no markets for it, it's not finding its way to any useful endpoint right now. They're generally landfilling it. So there's I think a time is now to really look at new ways to deal with glass, whether or not it would ever be combined with a curbside program, which in your case it's not. And that's generally the direction that most curbside programs are going. It's actually beneficial to separate the glass from the rest of the recyclables and then find a better way to deal with it than they currently were, because that's really where the problems stem with glass. The nature of glass combined with paper and plastic in these processing facilities causes a lot of problems for the other products. As the fiber is compromised with the glass fragments that get in it, the glass also impacts the processes, bearings, and machinery as well. So there's a lot of wear and tear. And then the end product of glass coming out of those facilities is less than desirable because it's mixed glass and it's been mixed or contaminated with a lot of other things. So what you're really looking for is a a new form of collection that allows you to separate by color and keep the glass cleaner and separate. So I think if we're really looking at keeping glass in it, it's going to be a separate program. And it would either be, as opposed to adding a fourth collection at each point, typically what you're seeing are depots or places that can be set up where you would collect your glass separately and then bring it there when you have a significant amount that you want to recycle.
So we've had 2 conversations with a company called Ripple Glass. They're out of Kansas City, and they have a really successful program where they work with grocery stores, breweries, and liquor stores to host a glass bin. So if you think about all of the grocery stores, well, I don't know. I was going to say breweries. I mean, we have quite a few now. It seems like it's growing, and liquor stores. You start to see that there's potentially a lot more options where a drop off for glass could be placed. I talked with them again a couple weeks ago. They're not in our market, but they're interested in looking outside of Kansas City, and it's a really interesting model that's very low cost.
What happens with the glass that goes to the drop-off centers now?
Well, Ripple Glass is a pretty large glass recycler, so they're collecting it and recycling it.
Gotcha.
Were you asking about glass here?
Oh, I'm sorry, the glass here in Nashville.
Oh, it actually right now it's going to Strategic Materials in Atlanta.
Why don't we sort by color anymore here?
Because it's just getting ground up and probably used as a replacement for aggregate, and so you don't need to do that. We actually did a little study with some of the glass from our drop-off sites in 2018, using it as a base layer in sidewalks. It seems to be fine. We've toyed around with the idea of getting a crusher, and they're not terribly expensive, but they do tend to need repair and property and staff. So I think there's options for glass, but I do think it's one of those things that it's sort of one of the last things you'd pick up at the curb because it really is a small portion of the waste.
In the public comments, can you touch just a little bit on, I know there was a lot of comments about, for instance, people who live in apartments that don't have the opportunity to recycle, how the new plan, because they wouldn't get these carts, how the new plan would implement that to encourage recycling.
I think one of the things we point out regarding multifamily dwellings, apartments, smaller places, is that first of all, they're the most difficult to bring into a plan like this and to get separation and diversion from. It presents a lot of challenges, and I think the most important aspect is working with the owners of the apartments, that they provide the facilities available for people to do it, because often those facilities aren't available or there isn't even space allocated for them, and so you have limitations as to what's even made available to them. The education and awareness outreach programs are what also help to make these programs known to people that are in apartments, so you can meet with them at apartment meetings, when they talk about issues, that they understand these programs that are available to them. That's another component of it, is often they just aren't even made aware of the fact that these things are there to be part of the participation, and that it's often not required. So from that standpoint, there would need to be more compliance aspects of it too, in order to really get it, to happen.
Which goes back to the council and the codes.
Right.
If for new apartment complexes, they'd have to offer it.
Exactly, yeah. That was one of the issues that bringing up, whenever you're separating waste into multiple categories, now you're creating new space. So as new developers are bringing in buildings, they need to allocate more space and make sure it's accommodating that. And that'd be part of the approval.
Yeah, a lot of our discussion, I certainly don't want to speak for Sharon, but a lot of discussions, even when we talk about the downtown areas, is where these facilities are built and then they don't have the space to have multiple containers. So a lot of it is trying to work with, there's a lot of discussion in the things that you'll see and in some of the things that we're working on now, and working with codes and working with public officials in that review process to make sure the facilities are built from a standpoint where they could accommodate multiple bins or different bins. Like Chris said, I think I'm correct, Sharon, in the fact that if you have a private hauler at a multifamily now, all they have to do is offer the, manager of the multifamily the ability to have recycling. If they don't want it, there's probably most of the facilities probably don't have recycling as an option because their hauler doesn't even, provide it at the location now. So that once again, it gets back to that policy of sort of baselining those services, mandating certain services over a time period so that everyone's getting the opportunity to do that to some extent.
I think we also, just stepping back and looking at, so we can talk about multifamily, we can talk about residential, but if we really want to have our eye on the prize, it ain't there. It's commercial. And that, we need residential because it's all the reasons why we want residential. So of course we want, this is from my perspective, of course we want the services, and we need the residents behind the plan. So that's all really important. Education reasons, all that, and the fact that all these people work somewhere and, hopefully, and they go to the companies and they can get the commercial side. But the commercial is the big one. So I don't want us, for me, I don't want to get too bogged down in how we do multifamily. Right now, multifamily, you look at the surveys and everything was less than 50%. Do you want to recycle? They weren't interested in part of it because they're not having services. How do they do it? So they get it. But I think that I'm just hoping that we can really make sure and call attention to the fact that two things. We need the authority. And we need commercial, and we got to get it commercial because commercial's not gotten that right now. And however we get at that. So that's just kind of my big picture about how I just don't want to get, I hope we don't get bogged down, we don't get everybody bogged down on the residential side. Though that's important, I'm not discounting that. I just think that there's, I guess my question is that right? Are we going to get the biggest bite from going after commercial piece?
No question.
And with all the reasons why we want residential. So I'm not dismissing that. I just think that, I just don't want to get bogged down in a multifamily conversation with anybody.
Now, are you lumping C&D waste in with commercial?
Oh, yeah.
That's part of it? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but if you look at commercial too, there's a huge organic component to it.
Very much.
Obviously, it depends on the sector, but.
It's interesting that the component-wise on those pie charts, the residential organic's the largest, but commercial generates by far more organics, even though it's not as big a piece of the pie.
Right, yeah, just volume-wise.
But for this study, was commercial, since the apartment complexes are hired by commercial haulers, is it not considered in the commercial?
Oh, funny. I didn't think about that, Jeff.
That's always.
Because that's the way it is with us.
You're right. No, it's exactly the case, and we have to factor in knowing how many apartment dwellings there are. We factor in and account for that fact that it's rolled into the commercial numbers, and we have to dial it out when we're running the numbers.
So you can break that out?
Yes.
You got it. All right. Are we losing one of our board members here?
Is that okay? Do you have quorum issues or anything?
No,
Or do you have any issues you'd like to talk about? No, just kidding. I'm not the person. Sorry, I have to go.
Okay, well, thank you for coming. I think
Yes.
we still have a quorum.
Thank you.
We're not, and we're not voting on anything tonight anyway.
Okay.
And I'll just know that we will be
All right,
convening.
well, have fun talking
vote.
trash.
Can we review that timeline, by the way? When we are voting, and I guess that'd be a Sharon question. When the public period ends and when this begins to launch after it's been voted upon?
I think that one thing the board might want to do tonight is suggest a point in time where we're going to be cutting off public comments. At this point, I've just told people, keep sending your comments in. We haven't given anyone an official, this is, the end of public comments. So that could be something the board would like to do, is say, we want to take comments for another month or another week or whatever you think is best, and then we can take all of that, work on updates, and reconvene.
From the point in time when public comment is cut off, how long before it can be ready for a vote? Or
What do you think it would take? How much time do you think it would take for you all to,
With this public comment,
finalize the plan?
incorporate the comments
Yeah.
into the plan, right? I think it'd probably be realistically about 6 weeks, probably.
Okay.
So, so I know we're going to get more public comment tonight, so everybody knows that that's going to happen. But I think what I would like to know, I mean, did we get a big push on public comments to begin with, and has it pretty much tailed off? And if it has, then I think we ought to cut it off sooner than later. I think this has been out for quite a long time.
It has. I don't think there, and I have been, sort of trying to tell people that you don't have to get it to me today, but try and get it to me in the next couple of weeks.
Right.
There are, Linda Bragan has some comments. I'd really like to get hers, but I think she could send them to me in the next 2 weeks. Ashby, I don't know if TDEC was going to submit anything or give us any comments,
I don't think we can officially give any comments on it.
but, like secretly under the table.
Nothing secret.
Yeah, okay, never mind.
I'll report to the back.
So I think, for example, 2 weeks would be probably plenty of time, mid-June.
So mid-June, and yes, because this is what I was considering, and similar to another vote we took when we were actually looking at the contract, is that, we've talked about this at a previous meeting. We're having a public hearing tonight. You're going to go back, you, meaning Sharon, your shop, and the consultants, take all public comment, incorporate as well as ours, and bring a final document to us. And so we will have a document for us, and we will vote up or down on it. And so we're not going to take more public comment. We got the public comment. We've had plenty of time. There's been lots of opportunities for the last 6 or 8 months. So I'm feeling like we have done what we need to do and we should do on public comment processes. It's mostly now we got to make a decision, and we also know that none of this is going to happen from, we are, as Vanessa said, it's going now into the political arena, that we have created a document with really great options, lots of money identified, how are the steps, lots of things identified. No doubt it can be improved, and public comments will help us do that. But it's going to go into that arena, and that has its own pace, as everybody knows, and a pace that, we can push on. And I like the idea that we have this out in time to have conversations, even as a draft plan, with everybody we know who is involved in political decision-making. So I don't know if this answers your question. Is it, we're not voting on it tonight. We're going to accept public hearing. We're going to reconvene to vote yes or no on a final document. I know there's just lots of edits and all that stuff that needs to be done to the draft that's there already. That's not even content-wise, that's just grammar-wise, right, as all reports need. So with that, too. But, okay. So, Jennifer, does that give you enough?
Mostly. I just also, once the plan has been voted upon and is ready to roll, then how much time to implementation?
That's, obviously, we're in the end of this fiscal year. The funding for next fiscal year was submitted in January. So what we're trying to look at is we want to start, we've already started some things. Every other week recycling is going to happen. We're looking at the anaerobic digestion. So there's some things towards implementation that are already happening. The stuff that with GNRC and with the Food Waste Initiative are all key elements of the plan. They're already happening. So we're going to be looking at other ways to move forward in sort of preparatory, low cost, because we're not going to be getting any funding for anything else other than every other week. We had a status quo, and some of you may have been listening to sort of the news. Metro does not have enough money for much improvements. Public Works has a status quo budget. We did not get our contractual CPI increases, so in a sense, we have a budget cut for this coming fiscal year, and there's just no extra money. So we're going to see what we can through lead by example, through some policy programs, through initiatives and research that we already have funding for that will continue on into the next year, and move forward so that we, in January, have, we're sort of set up to make some requests. But we're, in the meantime, going to be working on some legislation for C&D and having all those conversations. So what we want to do over the next 7 months is try and get things rolling and start making some decisions and some policies that will help us as we implement some of these programs in the future. But to answer your question, we're already starting to implement on a micro level.
What's the official start date for the new council?
The election is August 1st, and so there will probably be runoffs. So it's likely to be sometime in September.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, Chris. Stay tuned. We're going to return to the public now. Can I get a hand, just show of hands of how many folks want to speak? I'm looking at 2. 1, 2. Anybody else? Mr. Bordenkircher, are you going to be speaking?
I don't think so.
Okay. Okay. Well, we have 2, I know that there was a conversation at the last meeting about limit on time. So I know, John, that you may have substantial comments. Tell me, I know you'd probably like 7 hours. That's not going to happen. I leave it to the board. I'm thinking, John, 10 minutes, and we'll check in on 10 minutes. There's plenty of written comments that we've already asked for, and we're all going to have access to those as well. We'll start there. What about you, Todd? Did you have your hand up? Were you?
I did. 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay. All right. So,
Mr. Chairman, before we go to public comments, do we need to give Sharon a drop-dead time of when we want to quit accepting public comments?
Oh, thank you, Jeff. You have a suggestion?
Well, that's why I asked the question about the council. I mean, it would be really nice. Chris said it's 6 weeks from the end of public comment to the point where the plan is ready. Working backwards, I mean, I agree that there's been plenty of time for public comment already. It can be cut off at the end of this month for all I
Well,
care.
we said June 15th. I mean, we're in a holiday or something. I'm just thinking, trying to give her a date.
Middle of June, sounds good.
June 15th or something.
And really, I don't know. I mean, ultimately, isn't this a legal issue that legal has to take care of? I mean, I'm just wondering, who gets to decide what a comment period is? I think of usually like federal regulations, you know, it comes out and it says you have 30 days or you have 90 days, and we never gave a set period when the draft came out. Is that
I
correct?
think we've probably exceeded that already.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
We've already exceeded that.
Yeah, I think. I just think that, you know, at the end. Let's see, what's today? The 20th?
21st, yeah.
Yeah, I would say. I would say by the, you know, all right, so we have, what's that? So maybe that first week, a full week of June,
The end of the full week of June, yeah.
the 7th.
How about D-Day?
No.
Thank you. So thanks, Jeff. I don't know if we need to have a motion on that. There's a general recommendation that the board says June 7th. If you need a motion, we can do it. But
Yeah, do we need a motion on that? I mean,
sure, why not? Well, we'll entertain a motion about when the public comment period is closing.
So much.
Jeff moves to close it when? Give me a motion.
You said June
June 7th.
June 7th. I'll
Need a
second.
Second by, all right. You got it? Okay, good. All right, so June, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, so June 7th is the final day for comments. Chris, buckle up, your shop's going to be busy. Hopefully you don't have plans over 4th of July. We're not smiling up here, we're serious about that.
Not even needs to be ready for the weekend.
Right. So, John, I saw you talking with Todd. Do one of you want to go first? Is there a...
I'll go first.
So, name... You can stand, you can sit, whatever you like to do. We're pretty informal. We need a microphone. Come up with a microphone.
There's
We got
right up there, you can push the little button
Black button.
that says speak. Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, good evening. Thank you to the board for the opportunity to say a few comments. My name is Todd Lawrence. I'm the Executive Director for Urban Green Lab here in Nashville. We teach about sustainable living, and I'm here actually as a representative of the Nashville Food Waste Initiative. That's a program that we co-lead at Urban Green Lab. And we've already submitted our comments, but just in case those weren't received or haven't been read, I'd just like to, for the record, read our brief statement from the initiative. And so I'll go ahead and begin that. As you know, by the way, before I begin, the Nashville Food Waste Initiative is a program of the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, and I'll talk more about that here in a second. And we also waste 40% of all of our food in the United States. So, meanwhile, 1 in 6 Nashvillians are food insecure. So we all can agree, I think, that this is a very important issue. The National Food Waste Initiative applauds the thought and hard work reflected in the Solid Waste Master Plan. It maps a reasonable, long-range approach to Nashville's waste strategies. Since 2015, the Nashville Food Waste Initiative, a pilot project of the Natural Resources Defense Council, has worked to implement high-impact food waste policies, programs, and on-the-ground actions. The draft plan reflects best practices for reaching our waste goals, including food scrap recycling, and puts Nashville on a trajectory similar to such cities as Louisville and Austin. Nashville's current 18% diversion rate is low compared to many cities, however, which necessitates gradual implementation of the plan. Nevertheless, as local landfills reach capacity and the population booms, it's essential that our city embrace actions that reduce waste generation and disposal. This approach promises multiple economic, social, and environmental benefits. The benefits outweigh the costs, which makes this plan a good choice for our city, which, as it turns out, is my hometown. So thank you very much, and on behalf of the Nashville Food Waste Initiative, thank you for giving this your attention.
Thanks, Todd.
Thank you.
Mr. Vanderhorst?
I don't have to press anything, or?
I think the red, the mic's on.
Do you want to put closer to you, John?
John Vanderhorst with Recycling Advocates of Middle Tennessee. I've been on this issue through 8 councils, 6 administrations since the late 1980s. I've supported the interests of the citizens, and I think I have a fairly realistic feel for the politics related to this. This has been a very political issue through the years, and it is a very non-confrontational time right now in the politics on this issue. It's been a lot more heated in the past. In 2016, we were in RAM trying to get a plan together, and the first step was getting fees established, and we had some struggles at that point. John proposed this initiative, so we pulled off of that, hoping that this would work. And currently, people in Urban Cruise Ship, my energy group, which includes solid waste, are pretty busy for another year. So even if we were to resume, it'd take a while. So our hopes were that this plan would work. I see a lot of problems with this plan, and the struggle is to try to convey them all in the time period that you're allowing me here. this board did go along with the citizens in saying we want a zero waste plan. And I think if they were to hold to that and demand a zero waste plan of these consultants, they would have to do a very different plan than what they have submitted. What they have submitted is a canned plan. It is now the plan du jour going around the whole country in these types of situations. Citizens calling for zero waste has been fairly common across the country. And this is the plan that is going to all the places that are doing that. So we could have spent $100 and bought the plan from some, you name the city, Austin, and saved us 3 years, 4 million tons landfilled, and cost us less money. And now instead of that, we spent nearly $1 million, and we get the same plan. And this is just the current rage of the style of the plan that's now going all over. And 30 years from now, it'll be a different plan, I'm sure, because it's changed from 30 years ago, where all we had to do was a curbside recycling program, and that was going to lead us to nirvana. So we've seen the results, and it's been a struggle for me in the environmental movement, because 30 years ago, we had the same number of people who were doing their homework than we have today. What we don't have is as many people running around, working the politics. So the political lift has been tough, and I can't support this plan as it is because we could do so much better. Like I say, I wish this board would insist on a true zero waste plan, not something that's going to get us far from zero waste when it's all said and done. I looked at the figures in this plan, these guesses that looked like people were pulling out of their asses as to what the tonnages were going to be, and I'm shaking my head. It's like there's no way that this plan, such as it is going to get us anywhere. It's going to be a repeat of what we had 10 years ago with the 2008 plan. Again, that one was for 60% reduction, and by the end of a decade, how much had we achieved? We were behind where we were in 2008. So this plan, while I can't predict how it's going to happen, I can certainly predict that, based on the numbers I see, is not going to come anywhere close to the numbers that the consultants are now talking about. This is a plan done for consultants that is going to make them a lot of money consulting over a lot of different programs over the next several years. And I can understand that impetus. We live in a capitalist society. These people are in there making money. Okay. That doesn't mean that the board has to go along with that. I would urge the board, representing who I represent, to give the highest priority to the citizen interests. Okay, what are citizen interests? If you go all the way back, what's consistent? Everybody that's approached this board over the last, as long as the board's been in existence since 94, 93, have been consistent. They want to minimize disposal, maximize material recovery. Okay, and they don't need to be listened to anymore on that. That's consistent, and that still remains the case. So, practically, how do we go about doing this? Let's look at the city that's doing the best now and see how they did it, for example. To give an illustration, I'm getting down to details finally here. There's a city that has leapfrogged to the top of the list now in recent years, and that's San Jose, California. They weren't in the lead several years ago. They leapt to the top of the list. They had targeted recovery rates for their contractor, and they're currently at 80%. Okay, and they have the contractor has severe financial penalties if they don't reach 100% by 2030. That's much more ambitious than here in this plan. How have they done that? Okay, the biggest increase, the thing that really leapt them to the front of all the other cities in the country, left them ahead of San Francisco and Seattle and all these others. What did they do? They applied a technique called two-stream wet-dry recycling, which we've talked about for nearly 30 years. In this plan, what did the consultants here say about two-stream wet-dry? They don't recommend it. That's the very thing that has put the city that's now in the lead in the country there, is a technique that these consultants don't recommend. It is a simple technique that applies to multifamily, all the commercial. And it was politically popular because it saved everybody money on the front end. It actually costed the generators less to be in that system versus what they had. It was done in one fell swoop. It took years to negotiate the contracts, but once that all got worked out, guess what San Jose did? They put the contracts online. Anybody can use it. That's a wonderful gift to have. Why didn't we take advantage of that? Instead, we paid a lot of money, nearly $1 million here. We got a plan that, we could predict what they're going to say. It didn't matter what the citizens felt. A lot of the bulk of this plan and the appendix has to do with citizen outreach. I'll give you an example how the citizens were not listened to at all in this process. That's on the pay-as-you-throw thing, which they Orwellian call save-as-you-throw here just to prove they're liars. Or Trumpian, whatever, it's the same thing. People aren't fond here in this blue county of people just trying to twist things around. It's pay-as-you-throw. In the task force meeting on that, I was in the residential section, both sections. I was put there. I didn't ask to be there. I was put there, but I was in that. One of the things written down, no pay-as-you-throw. Linda Bragan raised that in the general session. Bad idea. Okay, so all input was don't do that here. There's a good reason for it. You don't want to associate cost with the recycling. The benefits are hidden. Better to have the costs hidden too, so that the public doesn't get the impression that recycling is associated with complications and cost. Okay, did that get listened to? No. Why? It didn't fit the formula. And so if you're talking about going to our Metro Council with a scheme about all of a sudden we're going to treat USD like GSD, why do people join USD instead of GSD? It's first so they can get the trash collection. They don't have to have a separate billing on it.
2 minutes, John.
So, this plan, you see the public out here. This is a certain very narrow demographic of the population. The reality is, you can get council members pulling their districts out of this if this sort of scheme is raised to them. It doesn't make sense. So doing the metro facilities for things is actually easier than what these people make out as consultants. If it's capital improvements budget, that's paid for over the next 30 years, political administration's hands. Metro can build facilities, and fairly easily, and solid waste facilities compared to other facilities like schools and whatnot are actually pretty darn economical. They're just industrial. And we could be a lot more ambitious. We can do this. We can have systems where we don't have trash as a category. Fundamentally, if you're going to get to zero waste, in our education material, you see that bar graph we have, it's broken down 6 different material recovery general categories. Of them, how many of those 6 are in this plan? 0. We can do that. We have to have everything processed. We can have different categories of dry waste for processing, but to keep trash in here is just really shows where the consultants are coming from. They really are the big winners here are the landfill industry, the landfill oligopoly that is all set up to receive our waste, as the slide shows. For the next 60 years, just 3 near landfills alone can handle all our waste. So this this is not going to be, people aren't going to be scared into this. They've got to use simple logic, which this doesn't have. This logic in this plan is just how we can turn this into what, something like a military defense contract or something, where the cost overruns and time overruns just mount up to the point where certain people make a lot of money and the public gets screwed. And that's the way this comes across. So I can't support this plan. If you want me to be down there in council paving the way for this to get in, I can't associate my good name with this piece of trash, this plan here. And I want you guys to have some backbone and say to these consultants, damn it, you give us a zero waste plan. Don't give us this crap, because this isn't a zero waste plan. This is something that's not even going to get to 90%. It's not even going to get to 50%. It's not even going to get to 30%. It's going to do like the thing that happened 10 years ago. You turn it over to Public Works, you're going to have the same result. So I'm not happy with this. And the positive comments they're the type we got 30 years ago from these groups like Recycle Nashville that don't even exist anymore. That's how much their theory worked.
Right. So just wrap it up. You've gone over about 3 minutes now, so just.
Okay, well, I will comment on that. That time thing is what I use as an example of how little this board cares about the citizens. You let Public Works go on and on. You let the consultants go on and on, but the moment the citizens get up here, you're time limited to some little part. I mean, I have comments on, I would have liked to have been in the board, be able to ask the questions and point out things to the slides along the way. There are a bunch of slides. I don't get that opportunity here.
So I'm assuming that you have or will be submitting written comments, because this is,
I don't know if it's worth my time, John.
Okay.
This is just, I've just seen this go on and on and on. Mm-hmm. This board has done this for, your whole length of your term here. We're behind where it was when you took over this board. The board has done, through your 18 years, everything you've wanted it to do. And look what the results have been. They're pathetic.
Hey, John.
Wasn't it going to get through to you that there's a pattern here?
I have some questions for the consultants based on the questions you've raised, if you don't mind if I take over.
And do what? Ask.
I want to ask them a few questions about the points that you've raised. So, hey guys, question, is there a way to speed up the timeline to make it more aggressive, to make it more appealing?
We have the original one in there is very aggressive. Certainly, it is up to you all, from my perspective, and I'll let Sharon come to, you all as a board, how aggressively you would like to push your sort of findings up through the council. I think our personal opinion, as we sort of sit down and talk through it after the draft was done, was that we were really concerned about the political will to push it at a timetable as fast as what we originally showed. We can't predict that would or would not lead to success.
So,
if all the money, as John stated, if the money was available, you could build the facilities, you could roll the programs out as fast as you possibly could roll them out. I don't totally agree with John that in his point that the money, I certainly don't see just a big bucket of money sitting down at Metro Council ready to be spent on public works facilities for solid waste tomorrow. If that's true, that would be great, and I think, once again, I don't speak for Sharon, but I think she would be more than happy to roll out programs tomorrow if the facility and money was there to be able to do it.
Yeah, see, I think the good thing about the timeline is that we don't necessarily have to follow that per se. We can, as council has will, as the mayor has funding, we can move forward as quickly or as we can. I mean, the exciting thing about Mayor Briley is he's very knowledgeable about waste management, and he's very interested in it. So I think we have an opportunity there to be more aggressive. But one thing we asked the consultants to do was to have an aggressive, moderate, and a conservative timeline, and we may, as a city, make our own timeline that's a mixture of those, just based on when we could have funding. I mean, nobody saw every other week funding for recycling in FY20 budget cycle. Briley wanted to do it, and he's doing it in a budget year that's otherwise very tight. So I think there's a lot of flexibility within that timeline.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think the risk is if you go up to the mayor's office and the council with just an aggressive plan, and they don't agree that the funding is there to do that, then all of a sudden does the whole thing. I mean, we're trying to counteract some of the things that, I totally agree with John. You know, when you have a plan that was developed before and nothing seems to make much progress, I can understand how there's concern that, you know, this is different. That's why we're trying to leave open the potential of these are programs that need to be implemented to get there. How they're implementing and how they're stacked together has some flexibility from a financial and an implementation schedule standpoint.
Okay, thank you on that. The other question I had for you was about San Jose. I remember that you did look at several cities and showed us all of the cities across the country that you did comparison studies for. I don't remember if that was one of them. Can you elaborate on that?
I don't know either, but we certainly can check on that. I did look up San Jose's update as John was talking in 2017, so this is fairly recent. And as John mentioned, very similar numbers to what he's saying. I mean, it states San Jose's got up to 75%. I will read this right out of the intro to that program. In San Jose, zero waste is defined as landfilling no more than 10% of waste or recycling 90%. So from a bar-to-bar standpoint, what San Jose considers zero waste is exactly what we are stating is zero waste.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the wet dry is a commercial program, I would imagine largely for restaurants.
It's commercial,
Yeah.
residential. They had a three-stream in place, and I don't know the length of the contracts they had for that. But when they built the processing facility for the two-stream wet dry, they had the residential recyclables be a separate processing
Separate piece
line
of that.
in that same plant. So I'm assuming there were matters of contract that they had to respect on that, and I don't know what they would do now if they had to start over with the residential. I just don't know.
Yeah, so we actually, as part of the downtown study, have had a conversation about, you know, wet dry for downtown customers. It's not something that I think we could get our customers downtown to do. We couldn't even get them to sort glass at this time. But with more authority, I think it's a very viable option. Similar to, we're structured a little differently than San Jose, so we would just be able to impact probably our customers downtown like they do with their contract in the commercial area.
The reason they went with the two-stream is that it allowed every single generator to be able to do it, even if in some cases they had to blue bag stuff, and because they had just one container. But if you think about downtown with its glass, for example, from the honky-tonks, the best way to preserve glass is really to have it be in as big a mix as you can for cushioning purposes, back off a little on the compaction. But the more other stuff it's with, the less breakage occurs, actually. So if they're blue bag in the wet, you know, and everything else is going in the same container, and it depends on processing facility, then they went with that because they wanted buy-in from the entire commercial sector who was going to be asked to go under this new system and instead of their prior arrangements. And if they could sell it by, you do not have to have another container. They said, well, this is doable. If they had said, well, you have to have another container, so many of them would say, we're going to oppose this because we don't have space for another container. That wasn't built into our situation.
So I'm curious, I saw in there too that wet dry was just, you know, you weren't looking at it. So, and, you know, John, this has been John's mantra for forever that I've known John, and for a long time. So whatever the time period is. But the point is, so, and I know that you all had spent a lot of time with John talking about all this. So, so what was the critique from your perspective why wet dry wasn't viable? What was the kind of
The primary issues here that we dealt with, and we did look at San Jose, and it's
Hey,
very well known in the industry.
Chris, could you come up and use the microphone? Your voice doesn't carry quite as well as Zach's.
The couple of things that stand out for San Jose that make them unique in their approach, that's appealing to John and many others, as well as the industry, is one, they're in the heart of the Silicon Valley. I mean, they're one of the most affluent areas in the country. So they had a unique ability to fund large-scale projects quickly. So they were able to ramp up very quickly. And they did accommodate this two-stream system for the commercial side, and they do a very good job of collection. So they have very high recovery numbers. But the end products is really where the problem is, because we're looking at the full cycle. And when you look at the compost material that's coming out of this out of these processes, when you allow a multitude of different organics or even papers and plastics that get involved in there, the compost itself is so contaminated that its marketability is quite low. So the end products that they have are really difficult to market. And that's really the biggest problem you have with a tube-in system, is that you end up with materials that are contaminated at a very high level. And we know everything's going the opposite direction right now. Right now, it's all about creating high-quality feedstock for markets. And that's how you're going to be able to actually get it recycled, not just collect it.
So what's happening with that? So is that just being landfilled, or what, I mean...
We don't know exactly, but I've talked to people that have toured it and inspected the material, and when we look at it, we all kind of wonder exactly where, how they're able to use it. I assume maybe they have some uses for it that don't require them to sell it, but it would be a difficult material certainly to sell on a commercial market and compete with other compost.
I think it'd be really important to be able to have that. Not just what I think, but having some real data on that, because this is going to be a conversation point. And I'm curious about kind of what's the data, and on that piece, and like what you said, what the end market is and all that. So
we had a lot of conversations with Metro Water and Sewer on that with their sludge thing, and I think the themes are very similar here, and. One thing I do like about what the consultants here have done, because Zach is a wastewater specialist, and particularly his ties with Metro Water, and that is a logical cooperative thing to do, because they have experience with this. So the logic goes back to what is better, to put all our material out into the environment in some way, and try to fix it by, say, in the wastewater system, by tougher pretreatment standards, so you cut down on the bad stuff going in that improves the quality? Or do we have some sort of a system where we're putting out maybe a higher quality product, but then the rest is junk that we have to landfill? So it's the same. It's the same conversation in the solid waste. Do you go with a system that gets a higher amount of volume total out of the landfill and let the quality suffer a little bit, because inevitably the more quantity you get, you are going to increase the chances of some things going in. You got to go with more robust systems like Sevier County does for handling everything, so that your system works. But then you're going to be then you have to ask yourself, well, is there a market for a lower grade product? Is that better? That is a conversation that is deep here, that should take place with this board included. Water and sewer are good people to talk with on it, but it's a huge conversation that should take place because the ramifications are so huge. You're talking about a third of the waste stream, basically. And it's the most problematic part of the waste stream if you put it into a landfill, because it's what generates the methane. So it is huge, and to have the decision made, this is the direction, and I think it needs to slow down a little bit on that particular topic.
So what I would like to have, and really part of the party, we actually wanted, let's see, let me back up. What I would like to have is some information about how that end product, and Chris, I'm looking to your shop, how's that end product being used right now? Because if it's not being used, if it's mostly going to landfill anyway, then so what? But if it's not, then so what is it being used for? And so what is, and what are the, so it'd be just good to have that information. I think I would like that. I don't know if the board would be interested in that too, just understanding what.
John, you brought up Sevier County, and I mean, of course, the problem is that, anything that doesn't come out on the metal side, it all goes to a landfill. We've changed classifications, but it's still all going to a landfill.
Yeah, it's class 3 landfill, and they found out all they put in glass in the compost. Well, none of the farmers want it because it hurts their livestock. So there are these practical considerations, and we're not for putting glass in the compost. We're trying to get that, made into something higher value than that. So we're not proposing with the wet-dry systems that, I think what happened in this report is they said that they tended, if somebody isn't reading it carefully, to say that if with two-stream wet-dry system, you are going to have what they call a dirty MRF for your dry waste, which is dirty MRF is normally used with mixed waste. Okay, but you have to be robust enough, you have to build the equivalent of a dirty MRF to handle even if you're doing a wet-dry separation, just to make sure in the worst of situations that you can handle it all. But that doesn't mean that you are going to end up with mixed waste. My experience has been both the pilots that we have actually done with wet-dry and I've been to Guelph. Twice I've seen it, and the thing is, if you keep it simple to people and you're saying this is the important thing to do, you're going to get greater participation in it than a more complicated program. And generally, if it's a simple thing like, we're going to be processing all of your dry waste, it's very important to get the organic separated, and it's very important because this is going to go out on land that's going to be in the environment, that we don't put bad stuff in there. You're going to tend to get actually higher participation than you do with the other types of recycling programs, and that's the best you can do is the program that gets the greatest participation, and some of these wet-dry concepts can get the highest percent participation. So I would hate to see us not go in simpler, more effective ways just because we're afraid that somehow the public can't comprehend some of these things. I think some of these systems are simple enough for most people to understand. If you get the complicated ways that is in this report, I mean, most of the public is just, they're not even paying attention to this and this logic.
Well, it's not complicated. It's just 2 versus 3. It's as simple as that, 2 versus 3. And really what we're talking about is separating what is allowed and what can be actually marketed for recycling on the dry side versus what is considered trash. So if you're mixing dry trash in with recyclables, your contamination rates go through the roof, and you have a completely unmarketable material. You're not going to get the results that you're looking for. And it complicates the issue on the wet side as well. It just hasn't worked, and it's not used prominently in the U.S., and it's not even used in Guelph anymore.
Yeah.
It's a 3-bin.
They're 3-bin, yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, we've looked at the 2-bin system quite
I mean, in a
intensively.
perfect world, we'd love the 2-bin. No one wants to have additional bin. We don't even want to have a bin that says anybody can throw any solid waste or trash away. But the reality of people really it being a functional, system, we just don't feel like to go from in a system where we're in a single bin now in Nashville to jump to a 2-bin. It would be a humongous jump, we feel like.
Yeah.
Well, you can try out these different methods. I found that interesting. It was not in the report, having some pilots to try out some of these things. And there may be certain regions of the county that prefer certain things than others. And so I think this is, but whatever system you go with, we're talking many years here. So I would urge caution and not just saying, look, because we're trying to wrap this up now, let's just go in this direction. Because it might not be the right, if it's the wrong direction, then we're really we're way behind for having, been hasty right now.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. That was helpful, and it was a helpful conversation. And I'm just going to reiterate my request that I hope the board feels the same way about it. Thank you, John. So I think Chris and Zach, it'd be great if we just had some, when we got together the next time, even though we're looking at a final piece, at least having that information so we're more informed about. Basically, we're talking about the trade-off between quality and quantity, and what gets landfill and what doesn't. But I don't want to pretend that we're going to have a wet dry and a lot of it's going to go to the landfill ultimately anyway. Because it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. But I don't want to pretend that this is nirvana where we're marching to. But one thing I want to say that's something just wrapping up for me about something that's very different than 2008 is that we have a landfill that our close landfill is shutting down, and we're going to be driving it's at least 100 miles to these other two landfills, and that all the reasons why we can make arguments from the carbon footprint to just the cost of translating. We have reasons, and plus the fact is. They banned the bands, but I guarantee if you probably talk to people in Camden or down and say, hey, did you know that we're actually sending more plastic bags to you now because we can't ban them, right? I mean, there's that conversation. Not that plastic bags take up much volume, I get it. But the point is that, here we go. And as I was talking to the guy who, one of the waste management people, and they said they hate plastic bags because they blow around. Todd, you were in that conversation and listening to that, it's like, we hate them. So, for all the reasons. So anyway, that's a diatribe. But thank you, John. Is there anybody else? I saw that you kind of tentatively raised your hand. Did you have anything you want to?
Yes, I work with Lydia and we recycle all the green waste with the city, with Nashville, with the county. So I just had a couple questions and I can talk to them offline.
Okay. All right.
I see a lot about that in the initial draft. So
wonderful.
It's already happening in that direction.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I want to add one more thing that is very different than 2008, and it is that baby boomers are going out and millennials are coming in, and it's a different force.
Please.
And we have no idea. We're in the middle of, we don't know.
You're right.
So I went to a high school commencement last night with my nephews. He graduated from high school, and I was very hopeful. And we are not going to have all the answers. We are just creating a roadmap for the next generation that is coming pretty soon. We're mostly on our way out. So I just hope that they are the ones that are coming with the energy. That we need them. So that's what I wanted to add.
Here, here. Thank you.
And excuse me, I've got one thing to add as well. There seems to be some concern about timeframes, timetables for all this to happen. The reality is, Sharon, you're exactly right. The every other week recycling pickup came out of nowhere in a very tight budget. The reality is, any of this that needs dollars to be implemented is probably going to have to wait until a property tax rate increase. Now, who knows when that's going to be? I know that Mayor Briley, whoever wins this year, may have enough political capital to attempt that in like 2021. But so I think we need to. I think the slow and steady approach is it's going to be forced upon us.
Okay, well, I think we're closing the public comment period, and I'm seeing hopeful faces. I don't know if stomachs are rumbling or not. But With that, I don't know if there's any other business any board member has to bring up. I have none.
This is my last meeting. I'm moving to Cheatham County officially, so thank you very much for having me.
Wow.
Yes,
You're
I
going-
appreciate the honor to be here, and definitely encouraging the activists out there to go with the numbers, and not to be polarized. Like, we need to have a middle ground because it's everybody's problem. So I'm going to be excited to see what I can do in Cheatham County to service, and thank you for what you do. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you.
I think we're going to be, hopefully there'll be a lot of compost coming out your way. Isn't it?
Build an anaerobic digester out there.
Okay. Right. Okay, well, seeing that there's no other business, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Jennifer Hackett, and second?
Second.
Vanessa, seconding? All right. Thank you very much. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right. We are officially adjourned. Stay tuned for the...
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.